Hey guys, today I'm going to teach you how to add and subtract rational numbers in real life situations. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to apply your understanding of rational number operations to real life situations because in real life, we aren't always going to have integer operations. A lot of the times we'll use rational numbers. Go ahead and get out your binder, turn to the math section, and get ready to take some notes. So like I said, we see rational numbers frequently in real life. Here's some examples. We're going to start out by just brainstorming some words or phrases that indicate a positive or negative number. We're going to list them in this table. What I want you to do is to go back to your vocab lesson, and I want you to think about your addition and subtraction words. Those clue words are going to be kind of the same here. So go ahead and do that now. Take a second and jot down anything you can think of, and then I'll go over it with you. Okay, so by now you should have brainstormed some words on your own. I'm going to go ahead and start now looking at the positive category first. So let's just think about some real life scenarios where we might see some positives. I always think about this with money. So when we think about real life, a lot of times we're talking about money. There's a couple of money keywords we can use here. One of them is deposit. Deposit means that I put money into my bank account. You can write that off to the side if you need to. Deposit means that you're putting in money. You could also just talk about receiving money. That's a math word. So when you receive money, you deposit it into your bank account. At the end of the year, that's called your salary. So your income or your salary is another math word for positives. If your income is greater than your expenses, which we'll get into in just a second, if your income is greater than what you spend, you make profit. So profit is a positive number. So in the business world, we might call that generating revenue. And these are also increases in gains in your money. So these are the new words that we can add to our list of vocabulary words for sums, for positive, for adding. We are seeing rational numbers more frequently in real life than integers because we're usually talking about money when we're talking about in real life rational numbers. So almost all these words can be applied to money. So now let's look at the words we never want to hear when we're talking about money, which is the negatives. So let's look at the flip side of all these. So the opposite of deposit would be a withdrawal. If I take out money from my bank account, I'm making a withdrawal. If you withdraw more than you have in your bank account, you could go into debt. It's spelled D-E-B-T. The B is silent. You could go into debt, which means that you owe more money than you have. That's in the negatives. Your expenses is the things that you spend money on. It's like I was saying earlier, if your income is equal to your expenses, you would have a net zero. You would have a zero pair. If your income is equal to your expenses, you would have no profit. You wouldn't owe any money. If your income was equal to your expenses, that would make zero. That might be an important thing to know for a question down the line, so make note of that. The opposite of profit is a loss. So instead of making money, losing money, you could also call that a negative profit. That's also a loss. If you take out a loan or you loan money, that means that you're in the negatives. You now owe or are borrowing. So owe is another word. And then we know that the opposite of increase is decrease. So we'll go ahead and add that to the list. And then the last one I want to just add is a deduction. So if you deduct, you are decreasing, you're taking out, you're taking off. So sometimes negatives are a good thing because sometimes whenever we're going to the store, we want a price decrease or a price deduction. We want those things because that means we pay less money. But most of the time, the positives, these are the good words. These are things that are going to increase your bank account. And then these negatives are the bad ones. These are the ones that are going to lower you, take off money. But like I said, sometimes a negative can be a good thing. So for the next few examples, we're going to think through the situation. So we're going to be presented with a scenario. We're going to think through that situation. Then we're going to follow the rules for adding and subtracting rational numbers. So the math is not new. It's just an application of something that we already know. So instead of just being numbers in a problem, we're now going to look at some real life scenarios you might be faced with. Then the last thing, we'll draw a number line or a model to help. It's always important to model your problems, especially word problems, with pictures or number lines. It just helps us to understand what our problem is asking better. So we'll go ahead and look at the first question. So number one, it says, during a drought, the local lake was 2¼ feet below normal levels. As we go through a word problem, you always want to underline the important information. So 2¼ feet below would be a negative 2¼ feet. 2 weeks later, the water level had dropped an additional 1�3/8 feet. So it dropped an additional 1�3/8 feet. How far below the normal level was the water after 2 weeks? So we'll start with what do we know? What do we know from the problem is what we underlined. We know that it dropped to 2¼ feet, and then it dropped an additional 1�3/8 feet. So just follow along with me as we go through this problem together. The next thing we need to figure out is what we need to know. So as we go through a word problem, it's usually good to have some sort of plan like this. What do we know and what do we need to know? The thing you need to know is almost always going to be in the last sentence. It says how far below was the normal water level. So we need to know how far did the water level change. So we want to know how much did the water level change after 2 weeks. So we're going to go through and we're going to have a plan. We're going to make a plan for how we're going to solve this problem. So we need to figure out, it's one of the four operations. Are we going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide here? Those are the four operations we're used to doing. So it says it was down 2 1/4 feet, and it dropped an additional 1 3/8 feet. So just by looking at our word clues, we can tell that down 2 1/4 means negative, dropped means negative, and then it dropped an additional. So really we're going to add the two negatives together to get our solution. So one more time, I know that I'm going to add these two negative numbers. I know that they're negative because this says it was 2 1/4 feet below. And I know that this is negative because it says it dropped 1 3/8, and it says additional. So I'm going to add the two negatives. So I can set my problem up like this. What I want you to do now is to go ahead and pause the video, try to convert these to improper fractions, and then press play when you're ready to check. Okay, so by now you should have looked at these two mixed numbers and you realize you want to do an operation with them. We want to add. So the first thing I want to do is I don't want to add mixed numbers. I want to add improper fractions. So I'm going to go ahead and do my around the world here. I do 4 times 2, which is 8, plus the 1, which is 9. So I know that this is the same thing as -9/4. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. 8 times 1 is 8, plus the 3 on top is 11. So I'm going to multiply and then add. So I've got 11/8, and remember that's negative. So when we look back at our notes for adding and subtracting rational numbers, in this case fractions, we want to make sure that they have a like denominator. We want a least common multiple for their denominator. So we're going to start by making them both have the same denominator or bottom of the fraction. They both can be an 8 on the bottom, so we're going to convert the -9/4 into eighths. We're going to do that by multiplying everything in that fraction by 2. So I went out of the box just a little bit, and you can too, or you can do this on a separate sheet of paper. But just wanted to show you, all I did was convert this -9/4 into eighths by multiplying the top and the bottom by 2. I wanted it to match the denominator for the other fraction. When their shoes are the same, I can change their outfits, is what I always like to think. So now that they both have an 8 on the bottom, I can add their numerators. I have a negative plus a negative, so I'm going to add like normal and then keep that sign. So we're going to do 18 plus 11, and then the answer is going to be negative. So I got a 29, and I know that that's negative, over 8. I always keep the denominator. Now, I don't want this to be an improper fraction now that I'm ready to know my solution. So for my solution, I want to simplify this and write it as a mixed number that we can understand. So we're going to go ahead and try to think of how many times does 8 go into 29. I can tell you that it goes in 3 times evenly. 8 times 3 is 24. So it goes in 3 times evenly with 5/8 left over. And the answer is negative because it dropped. So your solution would be -3 5/8 feet. You always want to add what are your units. So now we've answered the question, how far below the normal level was the water after 2 weeks? It dropped 2 1/4 and then dropped 1 3/8 more. So it dropped 3 5/8 feet altogether. Okay, so let's look at question 2. This one I'm going to kind of go through with you, but I'm going to ask you to pause at periodic moments and you are going to try things as you go. So if you want to, you can start out by reading the problem to yourself, underlining important information, and then writing in here what you know. So if you want to go ahead and take a second and pause, now's the time to do so. Okay, let's look at our problem. It says Jonathan borrowed $800 from his grandparents to start a lawn mowing business in his neighborhood. After mowing lawns for a month and paying his expenses, he was able to pay them $188.56. How much does Jonathan still owe his grandparents? So he paid them $188.56 off of his loan of $800. So we know that he has $800 in his pocket. However, because that money is not his, it's money he owes, I left that red, so that's a negative as far as I'm concerned. He borrowed 800, so he owes 800, but he did pay back 188.56. That's going to be a green. He paid that back. So I'm looking at this from the grandparents' perspective. They're down 800, but now they've got back 188.56. You could think about it the opposite way and think, well, he's got $800 and now he's lost 188.56 of that money. So you can do it both ways, and we'll get into what that looks like here in the plan and work section. But let's go ahead and look at what we need to know. If you haven't already, go ahead and pause the video and try to write here what you need to know from the problem. Okay, so you should look at the last sentence and look at what it's asking. How much, that's saying find an answer, does Jonathan still owe his grandparents? We need to know how much Jonathan still owes his grandparents. Okay, so let's make a plan here. So let's look at our plan for this. So now he borrowed $800. So I'm going to write that as an integer, negative 800. And then it says he paid back 188.56. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure that we follow our rules for adding rational numbers, in this case decimals. And we're going to start by looking at the process for when we add or subtract numbers with different signs. So we're adding numbers that have different signs. What do we do when we have numbers with different signs? Pause the video and think about it if you need to. When we are adding numbers with different signs, we're really subtracting. So we're just going to subtract like normal. We want to write these as decimals vertically, and then we want to subtract like normal. Then we'll get to it in just a second, which one is going to be the negative. So we have 800 minus 188.56. If you notice when I wrote this, I put the decimal behind the zero here. That's because 800 is the same as 800.00. So we want everything to line up. The hundreds places are in the same spot here. Tens, ones, tenths, and hundredths. So we make sure everything lines up along that decimal. Then we can just subtract like normal. In real life, you would have your calculator on your phone for this. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to type it on my calculator on my phone. If you want to be smart and fancy and go through and you want to borrow and do all that good stuff to subtract like normal without a calculator, more power to you. Go for it. But when I subtracted, I got $611.44. So what we want to look at here now that we've subtracted our two rational numbers, we want to look back and just look at the process. They were opposite signs, so we subtracted. And now we're going to take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. So what I mean by that is there's more negatives than there are positives. So our answer is going to be negative. It's dollars, so I put a dollar sign. It's an ugly dollar sign, but I'll go ahead and draw that out for you here. Just an S with two lines down it, and that goes in the front of your numbers. So my solution is that Jonathan still owes $611.44 to his grandparents. So because I wrote owes, I understand that that's as a negative number. If you wanted to write minus 611.44, that'd be fine too. So there's one more question I want you to try, and I want you to do this one all by yourself, and then we'll start class with this problem. So go ahead, pause the video, try this problem all by yourself, make sure you have it ready to go when we go over it next class. All right, guys, that's it. If you made it to the end of this video, please put your favorite movie in the comments. Today we went over adding and subtracting rational numbers in real life with two examples. So by now you should apply your understanding to rational number operations for life situations like distance and with money. So now you should go back to the calendar and complete any other assignments you have left for the day. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye!